when the European, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing talks about this, that she said when the European came and he raped the women and saw that brown babies came out, they start freaking out. They start, oh my God, we'll be annihilated. So they had to come up with a system so savage that it would completely derail us for centuries to come. Thus the birth of racism. Not because they really think they're better than us, but because of an innate desire to live.
A serious insecurity.
Well, all things, when they're threatened, when their lives are threatened, whether it's a virus or a dog or a human, everything wants to live. So it's going to do whatever it can when it feels backed in the corner or threatened. So that's the viciousness that we're dealing with.
And I'm grateful for you putting in that context though, because also, as we reflect on our story and we reflect on history as well, our story and history, and many times we can have this narrative in our mind that we're dealing with some superpower. We deal with some people who just outwitted us and are blessed by God and all this kind of foolishness, instead of just looking internally. And as you said, looking internally gently, being easy on ourselves and being truthful with ourselves. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong with that, and all that can yield is greater fruit.
True liberation, yeah. The clarity is a great gift. I often say that, because it allows us to be free.
True.
When we're clear, we know how to move.
True.
With a thing. And, just touching on that, that's why we can see so many of our people who are still cutthroat. Because they're afraid. What are they afraid of? Afraid of the accountability for what they or their own ancestors have done in their lives. But until we really start forgiving ourselves, we can't truly forgive others. And then those gates to the higher levels of consciousness will be potentially locked to us. And I say potentially because information is out there for anyone who can receive it. And like I said about the colonizer, it wasn't that he was so smart, it was that he paid attention. But what is it to pay attention? You're paying your energy, you're giving your energy to be attentive. Okay? You're noticing everything that's going on instead of being in ignorance. You see the word sound there. I want people to really pay attention to the power of the word, because that's what helps to create the spells that will either continue to enslave us or liberate us. So, as we are dealing with pain, giving of ourselves, our energy, to be attentive, being aware of our environment and what's going on, we can then take that through the clarity of what's going on. Gathering that information, then applying the information, then now we become knowers. And we begin to stack our ledgers of knowing, which then becomes knowledge. Okay? Then with that, compiled with the heart chakra of compassion, we then elevate in our consciousness and have a wizened dome. So, their wisdom. So anybody can get information, which is again energy that's just being formed. And what you do with it is on you. Sometimes you can unlock those subtle doors and attain power. We wonder how the forces that be are in power. So, well, it's because they tapped into these sciences. It's not because they're necessarily cultivating their inner self, but even they too are required to cultivate a level of integrity.
Absolutely.
But what is integrity to someone that is standing on this side of the river and they're just trying to survive? So they feel like, whether it's true or not, that this being over here is a threat to them over here. So then they're in integrity for finding out what it is that they need to do to be able to secure themselves, even if it's an illusion.
It's all relative.
Right.
That's why it's a collective journey and an individual judgment. So
exactly.
To speak, because, like one of the elders in our community always says, any anything or any action somebody makes sense with the right information.
You know, I agree with you. One of my spiritual teachers told me that with quantitative and qualitative information about a given set of situations and circumstances makes everything in the universe negotiable, except that the creator is. So, and whatever you call the creator, whether you just say are atheists and you say it's energy, or you say it's Jehovah, or you say it's Olodumare, it don't matter. We talking about the same thing. The force that creates all of this. That is, everything else though is relative. So going back to our story, it's important for us to recognize how we were able, through compromising the integrity of our relationship with eating healthy, began to blur our minds. So the ingesting of the alcohol, the ingesting of the sugar. Now we're not so in alignment with clear thought. Now we're being greedy. We were greedy already, but we're feeding that part of ourselves. So now we find ourselves being transported across the water to strange lands. We find ourselves in our land here being invaded by strangers. And because we're so busy fighting each other, we're able to be divided even more so and then conquered. Then becomes the production of food, and more sugar, more alcohol, which then continues to debilitate the people over time. So that we fast forward now to then say maybe the 40s and the 50s. When was World War II? It was in the 30s, the 40s?
The 30s and the 40s.
Yeah, around that time. And I go there because it was Germany that was doing all the experimenting with behavior modification, chemicals and drugs and all this kind of stuff. The things that the Germans were experimenting on with the Jewish people. Well, America invited those scientists to come over here.
That's where they came, and they brought, and funny enough, they brought their nitrates from the bombs that they didn't drop on people's lands, and that's what they brought to start their agricultural empire as well. What they now call Big Ag, which is the complete antithesis of life.
Yeah,
so they brought the crazy scientists and they brought the weird science and their chemicals.
Absolutely, they did it. And you know, Hitler was a metaphysician and a vegetarian. So what that speaks to the fact that, again, you can have access to these sciences, and it doesn't mean that you're cultivating anything on a subtle level inside of you, to make you a better person and to make the world a better place. And then to our previous point, Hitler really thought he was making the world a better place by purging what he called the lesser races. But even he knew he couldn't be successful in that. It was just a power play. And, they've set themselves up now so that their institutionalized racism is sustainable. People love that word. I like, really defining going into that word. As sustainability is something that just continues to perpetuate itself.
Right.
After a while, it's on automatic pilot.
Right. After a while, for real.
So Monsanto and their Roundup is sustainable destruction. Because so now that they've attacked the people of the earth, now they're attacking the earth itself, so that the layers of topsoil are being completely compromised and depleted in so many places on the planet. The rainforest was burned down, not all of it, but much of it was compromised all over the planet during COVID. So while people were busy worrying about being in fear about their health, these wicked ones were pouring gasoline in the rainforest and setting them on fire.
Real talk. So you mentioned something there in the midst of your reasoning. Some very powerful words, power play. And that really jumped out at me because that's what we're in right now, even to bring it to the up to date and what's going to be happening in the first weekend in June. Some people talk about chestnut checkers. That's one of the things that you hear a lot now. It could be become cliche sometimes. Chestnut checker.
What does that mean? I haven't
Well,
heard it.
Okay, well, what is being implied is that instead of playing chess, has this vibe of being a more strategic game, a game that takes more strategy, more long game, more thought, more vision, and everything, more strategy. You know, but checkers doesn't take as much, so it's like baby food and real food. So when we think about the power play, what came up in my mind as you mentioned that is that we're in the midst of this liberation. Some people don't like to use the word battle, war, journey. Let's just say journey, right? We're in the midst of the liberation journey. And in life, as you have already broken down so eloquently, there's ebb and flow. There's creative tension. You know, there's what may seem to be opposition, but it's all working for the same cause, right?
Exactly.
So here we are in the Gregorian year 2022 with the rising consciousness. You know, on any given day, I remember coming to your restaurant, especially when my Baba came to town, because you were so gracious. It helped to supply him with some of his favorite victuals. You know what I mean? He's been eating live food since the 1940s. You know, he's 97 years young now.
Awesome.
But I'm saying that to say the social impact that a business like yours has had. I used to come here and I've seen the line around the corner. You know, back in the days I couldn't using my little social currency and jump the line because my father would have gotten it back. When I was a child, when I was a child, and you know we're in Guyana where we're talking about food here. There's food shortage because of greed, because of a corrupt system. So most of the food, even though Guyana could be the breadbasket for the whole Caribbean and more, everything was down to just rice, and cassava, right? And so I would go to the market and people, because of who my parents are, they wanted to let me jump the line and I wouldn't be able to do that. But I did it a couple times when I came to get my father's food, but my whole point is, my point is the line around the corner in the middle of urban Atlanta, the voice of the people is the voice of God, right? People are it's clear that people want to be healthy. Our rising amount of people want to be healthy. So here we are. So help us to situate the wonderful Wizards of Raw festival.
Yes.
In this.
And how that applies. I know I've taken us all through our story.
No, that's very important.
And it is as the background.
Absolutely.
Because in building up to where we are and returning to the garden, which is the theme, it's time for us to really start reclaiming the land. How do we reclaim the land? By reclaiming ourselves. We are the land. We are the earth. So when we begin to reclaim and own our health, we then begin to pay attention, giving our energy to being present to what is going on the planet, and then we can begin to recondition the earth. Because just as when the colonizer came to these indigenous lands, they had the Bible, and the indigenous ones had the land. Now, the indigenous ones have the Bible, and the colonizers have the land.
Bible and fire water.
Yes, together it was that combination, right?
Yes.
And so we can talk about Nestle and their killing of millions of African babies and Indian babies and Caribbean and Central and South American babies with their formula back in the 70s. Why were these women not breastfeeding to begin with? See, so when we're eating foods, consuming liquids that don't nourish our being, then it affects how we think. You eat healthy, you feel better. When you feel better, you think better. When you think better, you make better choices. Thus, you can pay attention and improve the quality of life for you and those around you. But when your mind is cloudy, everything becomes a mess and things fall apart. Chinua Achebe.
It's a classic book.
Things fall apart. And so with that, we can then look and see how the destruction of our people, the integrity, the very fiber of our well-being is falling apart because we are consuming plastic, we are consuming poisons, we are consuming fillers and dyes and heat reactive additives and preservatives that can only destroy our body because that's what they were designed to do. So that's what it was designed to do.
I think of our ancestor W.B. Du Bois, and we mentioned your book. I took your book to his shrine in Ghana, in Accra, Ghana. You know, I was there, and he said one time that a system cannot fail those it wasn't designed to protect. And that's what you're saying here, even now, with in terms of this so-called medicine system, or this so-called medical system, or this so-called health food system, and all that. You know, in many ways. You know, if it was designed for destruction, then that's what it's going to be. And then we shouldn't. Then, while we're analyzing it, the point is this is for our people, for ourselves, for our family. We should be mindful of casting the wrong analysis on something, you know, not calling things by their proper name. And so we're expecting milk to come from a pig, you know, when it comes from a cow, you know, or we're expecting
a breast.
You know, we're expecting corn to come from a bean plant.
Yes.
No, it's not gonna go so.
Exactly.
So we got to look at the nature of things. That's the whole
right.
point.
That's right. And that's paying attention. That's being present to the reality. So it always comes back to that. What are you doing? What are you focusing on? Because what you're focusing on is what you're going to attract. That's a universal law, the law of attraction. It doesn't have anything to do with me or you. It just exists, right? So with that, you know, we have to then begin to say, well, why are we in this state? Well, let's rewind again back to our story, you know, which requires us to ask ourselves, well, when did we stop acknowledging that milk came from breasts? Baby's milk comes from their mother's breast. Calves' milk comes from their mother's udder, and so on and so forth. Nature has designed life in such a way that it will beget itself through its own lineage. It doesn't have to step outside of its own lineage unless there's a rare occasion. A very rare occasion where, say, maybe one of our mothers, the milk dried up, and if her sister couldn't nurse the baby, then you would go to the goat and borrow some of the goat milk. Then you would go to the cow. But traditionally, our sisters would do it. And to let you know how powerful it is, that's why the oppressor had us breastfeeding their own babies, because they knew their genetic strand could not withstand what was to come in life if it didn't have the melanin in the DNA in the milk to activate their latent melanin so that they could qualify to stay on the planet. Because otherwise they couldn't qualify. They wouldn't have the resonant frequency. Okay? So that's a deeper conversation. But let's not devalue the milk. Okay, so when there was this milk shortage, this formula shortage, I said good.
Right.
Now the women can go back to feeding their babies themselves. But then that begs the question, if the women have plastic in their breast, the silicone and the other stuff,
what the babies
do they still produce milk? I don't know. Maybe they do. But I don't know.
But those are important questions.
So
just as you said earlier, to unpeel the onion, to unpack the thing, because it's deep. The rabbit hole goes deep.
It really goes deep. And then you have to ask yourself, well, then if the women can't breastfeed their baby, then they're dependent on the ones who are making the formulas. And I was told that Bill Gates and them are behind, Bill Gates and Pfizer are behind the formula shortage because they want to re-engineer the formula. Why? To create more dependency on the controlling powers that be.
Because as Henry Kissinger said years ago, who controls the food controls the population.
And water is the new gold. Okay? So when we talk about how we have left our own sense of self, our own sense of connection, that yes, we are the body and we are the earth. We are the all. When we remember that, then we have to say, well, how did we get in this situation? Because when there was segregation, yes, there were very horrific conditions. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that the so-called integration didn't ease that. It did. However, it came with its own brand of problems. And as Dr. King said in one of his last speeches, I fear I have led my people into a burning house. Because the deeper he got into understanding the politics, the more he realized, oh my God. It was kind of like Barack Obama's face when right after they swore him in, his aide whispered something in his ear and that smile went into this stern look. He's like, oh, hell. And so people think, oh, I mean, Barack is what Barack is, and he had to do whatever he had to do. So I don't fault him. He played an important part in our story, as well as their story. I know that man didn't know the fullness of what he was getting into before he did. How could he? So anyway, saying all that to say, people have to adapt to whatever situation they find themselves in. And our people were pushing for justice, freedom, justice, and equality, not really fully understanding the English language and the trigonometry of it, right? Because what we push for in terms of integration would mean that we would be bringing something, we would gather, and then we would keep it and integrate it into what we had and valued of our own. Instead, we assimilated. We left what we valued of our own and went and tried to be everything and everybody else, leaving our culture, our things to be untended to. And then we want to be upset with why then the colonizer now takes everything that we have and commercializes it. It's because we don't value it, not the same. So functional integration has its place, yes. Go where you need to go, get what you need to get and bring it on. And utilize what works for you.
Freedom of speech and movement.
All of that.
Yeah, definitely.
But assimilation,
like you said, bring it home.
Assimilation is something else. And when we think about, this is something Spirit was giving me as I was meditating, because I was seeing so many of our elders, our freedom fighters, giving their very lives back to the system they fought against all their lives. They were dying of high blood pressure, lupus, on dialysis, heart disease, cancer, all of these debilitating diseases that they never had to have to begin with. Dying of this, and dying of these things because their diets, they were eating diets, they were eating to die, essentially. So consequently, they had assimilated so deep into mainstream American way of being, to the colonizers' way of being, that they didn't even listen to their own body wisdom. When it said, push back away from the pork. You're not working on the plantation like that anymore. You don't need to eat that heavy. But they kept on, and they kept on, and they kept on. So, not only do they give their lives back to the doctors, the hospitals, the pharmaceuticals, the senior citizens' homes, and if they can even get insurance, they pay an arm and a leg for insurance. But their whole life has come full circle back into the hands of the oppressor. And when they leave their body, 9 times out of 10, they're leaving debt for their families. Because we all know that it's a minimum of $10,000 to be in the hospital for a day. So we look at all of that and we say, well, how did this happen? Oh, assimilation. Assimilation. When you're talking about freedom, justice, and equality, and you have people that are morally here, who want to be equal to people who are morally down here, what happens? You have to lower in your standards. Yeah, these folks may rise a little bit, but the condition of our people is because we have lowered in our morals, in our moral standards.
Absolutely.
Okay? And so now we have all of this confusion going on. I mean, we didn't even used to have to pay taxes prior to integration.
Right.
Because we weren't considered citizens.
For the sake of time, I want to get to some of the nuts and bolts of the event. But there's something you mentioned there, in terms of assimilation, as you've been poignantly pointing out all afternoon since we started this conversation is the seed is that compromise, is a spiritual compromise, you know, the seed of it. When you were speaking just a minute ago, I thought of Imam Jamil, whose community is around the corner from where we sit, and they were at a gathering for Kwame Ture, and it was like a SNCC gathering, you know, and he was saying that, you know, one of the things that happened is that our ways became the ways of the people who we were fighting against. This is to a room full of frontline soldiers who gave their energy, their whole energy, you know, sacrificed everything, you know, in order to push our people's reality forward. That was a very honest reflection, you know, and it's those types of reflections we continue to need to have, you know.
And the wonderful Wizards of Ra will provide that type of reflection.
Beautiful.
Because, again, as Spirit gives me in meditation these themes, you know, I looked at how much we have given authority and dominion of our so-called freedom away again. Okay? In that, now we can do whatever we want to do. Women can become men can become women, theoretically. Because really what they become is wards of the scientists. Because they miss a shot, they don't take a pill, their body goes back to the way nature created it. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad. I'm not trying to do that at any point, because your path is your path. But the facts are that you have become a ward of the scientists. Okay? And so many of our children have become wards of the state. Because when we take government money, then we're signing over